history, the practice of child brides stands as a somber testament to the plight of young girls across cultures and civilizations. In days of old, marriage was often regarded more as a transaction between families than a union of love. This mindset, combined with societal norms and patriarchal structures, led to the pervasive occurrence of child brides. Many young girls, barely on the cusp of adolescence, found themselves thrust into marriages with much older men. These unions were often not by choice, but rather by coercion, familial obligation, or even outright force. The consequences of such arrangements were profound and far-reaching, affecting not only the immediate well-being of the girls, but also shaping their entire futures. Tragically, the plight of child brides was exacerbated by cultural attitudes that normalized and even justified such practices. In some cases, families faced with the stigma of sexual assault believed that marrying off the victim to the perpetrator was the most expedient solution. This grim reality underscores the profound lack of agency and autonomy experienced by women and girls in times past. Today, as we reflect on these historical practices, many rightly lament the limitations placed on women's rights and the pervasive injustice of child marriages. It serves as a stark reminder of the progress that has been made in advancing gender equality and the ongoing struggle to ensure that all individuals, regardless of gender or age, are afforded the dignity, autonomy, and respect they deserve.
Now, in the series that I started about a week ago, that your grandfather probably raped your grandmother, which is probably the reason why you've got 17 aunts and uncles, and Big Mama had 21 kids. And when you get to the bottom of it, oftentimes what you find is that your grandmother, your great-grandmother, maybe even your mother, they were brutally raped. They were child brides. How do I know this? Because I was recently talking to someone that I felt that when their husband died, it was an older woman. She just didn't seem sad enough for me, right? She just didn't seem sad enough. We're at the funeral and she's just kind of like walking around, and I'm like, and when I started to ask her questions about, finally had a conversation with her, hey, so how long were y'all married? And come to find out, she was 13 and he was 26 when they got married. And then I talked to my mother about being a too young bride. And my mother talks about the times where the young women would be all, sitting together, kind of talking, having a good time. The men are out partying. And as it started to get dark, the women would get quiet. Because the little teenage girls knew that their husbands were going to come in from the club, the field, from the whorehouse, and start raping them. Y'all know the house dress that your grandmother used to wear? Big Mama always had a house dress on. That comes from the days where the women had to have their bodies accessible so that when the men came in to SA them, that it would be easy for them. And can you imagine all the things that happens to a young girl's body? Like, we don't think about that when men are like, well, I want somebody like my grandma. But we don't think about, what happens to a little 13-year-old, a little 12-year-old, a little 15-year-old's body, the trauma that happens to her body. And if you're with a man that is there because he has you because he's abusing you, your parents gave you to this man, this old man, to abuse you. Imagine, do you think that he's gentle with her body? Do you think he takes care of her body? Do you think that when he would come in from the field, he would wash his body? Do you think that when he would finish being with the prostitute? Men now, with hygiene and bathtubs and showers readily available, they don't really utilize them like they should. So can you imagine back in the day where someone had to boil water and bring it in a pot for them to wipe their ass? Can you imagine all of the trauma to women's bodies, all the diseases, all the yeast infections, and all of this, just the trauma that happens to a woman's body? But we want to, they was back in the old days, that's what they did. Oh, it was okay, but because rape back then is not as traumatizing or as painful as it is now. I want you to think about when you would have been with a man and he got a little zesty, or you guys got a little rough. how did your body feel the next day? Well, can you imagine a man that hates you? A man that sees you as nothing but a hole in an object? Can you imagine what type of trauma happens to a young girl's body when she is married too young and married to a man that hates her and doesn't want her? Someone who just married her for the labor and married her to be in labor to have his children, and he kept her pregnant so that he could control her financially and also physically. So we're going to be talking about that, and I think that one of the reasons that we have so much trauma is because our mothers are going to the grave with this trauma. I remember once asking my mom, and she was talking about some things that her brothers did and some things that my dad's brothers did about SAing little girls, right? She's telling me about just some of the trauma. And I said to her, I said, well, she didn't say it happened to her. But I said, Mom, I said, have you ever thought about talking to a counselor, going to somebody? She said, oh my God, no. Because what if they told someone? See, they come from that era where you keep secrets. And by holding those secrets, what we've been thinking is that our moms are just bitches. Big mama just so what I used to always see, especially with that couple that I told you about, the 13, the 26-year-old, is the woman walking around seeming like she was just angry and hated the world, and the man was just like a little puppy dog, bringing her flowers and cookies and buying her jewelry, and she'd just be looking at him like this. Well, of course, if somebody had raped you from the time you were a little girl into having 20, 21 kids, abused you, and you couldn't leave because financially you were enslaved to him, right? How would you feel? And so what happened is these little girls grew up and they became women and they started to fight back. And so that's what happened. Your mama, your grandma, your great-grandmama, they got to be women and they started fighting back, fighting these men back, whether it be because of the times or because they just got older and stronger. And so the men were unable to assault them and to abuse them. And so then the men are like, they can't leave. And so then the men is like, well, I'm going to make amends, especially when they get old. I'm just going to make amends. I'm going to get her this and I'm going to do that for her. And they're trying to make amends for all of the abuse that the wives had to endure. And then what we see is our mamas being bitches. I remember doing a series about that. Y'all know, not too long ago, I did a series about women in the generation above me. And it probably was like a month or two ago. I need to go back and look. The women that are a generation above me, how cruel they can be. That they can be sometimes as cruel as white men and white women to us. But I never thought about the fact that they had been some little 13-year-old girls that men were coming home and chucking them down on the ground and they had to not wear underwear. And, I never thought about that. So it's not that they're hateful and hard and cruel. It's that they've had to put on a suit of armor in order to survive. And that is the book that I'm writing and what we're going to be talking about. So you start asking your grandma, because they 70, 80, some of them 90, maybe even 100 now. Start asking them about their lives so that you can get a grip on and understand who you are. Because 9 times out of 10, a whole bunch of us are a product of rape.